I mean, maybe you worked that out anyway, but that's what it was. Let's check in with our top producer, Susie, live from the pub, who has just grabbed something, I can't see what it is, from the drinks trolley. What are we going for today?
It is a pint of Fortitude, which is a best bitter, 4%, perfect for this time of year.
Yes. 4%, I think a pint is a little too much. Can I just have a small sip?
Half?
You're going to have a half?
I'll have a half. Thank you very much indeed. Today's confession comes from Jim. Jim, thank you. He says, happy to use just Jim as the name. Thank you. Keep it at that. Father Simon, the ever-forgiving Matt, Sister Susie, and the angelic team. My confession dates back to the early 60s, and I was 9. In the days before the iPhone and social media, my best friend David and I used to spend a lot of time outside, building dens, climbing trees, damming the local brook, that kind of thing. One day we were outside, and David said he wouldn't be able to come over again because they were moving abroad. I was a little taken aback at this point, but it didn't stop us enjoying the rest of the day, and David went home with not much ceremony, and that was that. While I did miss David's company, life went on. A few months later, my father, in a moment of extraordinary extravagance, bought a new car. Well, new to us. In reality, it was a high-mileage used one. It was, however, a fantastic Jaguar, all leather and walnut. Though not being the skinflint he was, it was only the pauper-sized engine, not the 3.8 all the robbers used.
That one.
Okay.
Yes. However, this didn't matter because we were the envy of the school run.
Yeah.
My father announced fairly shortly afterwards that he thought it would be a very good idea to go and visit our friends, David's parents. This was tremendously exciting as I'd never been abroad before, but abroad, however, turned out to be Shropshire. David's geography never being his strong suit. The visit in hindsight was almost certainly a ploy by my father to show off his new car. We set off, and as there were no motorways in those days, it took forever. Cries of, "Are we there yet?" getting increasingly frustrated answers. When we eventually arrived, feeling like several days later, David and I immediately fell into the normal routine of crashing through the house, running up and down the stairs, and shouting a lot. So we were unceremoniously kicked outside. What to do? Well, after milling about for a while, we decided that we should build a catapult, and that would be a very good idea, as we had just found an old inner tube. We found some suitable bits of tree and whittled them down into a suitable catapult-shaped handle using the pen knives that we had. Different times,
yes,
everyone.
They clearly were.
Having made our catapults, we then decided to set up a suitable target using an old Coke can balanced on a pile of bricks outside the garage against its back wall. We duly set about finding suitable-sized pebbles and projectiles and started to fire. We pulled the rubber back as far as we both could, and I pulled for all I was worth, and my muscles were straining, my veins were bulging. I was just about to let go when my hand slipped on the inner tube, and my stone left the catapult at an alarmingly wild angle, careering through the back window of the garage with a loud splintering noise, followed by an even more devastating crash as it had ploughed its way through the front windscreen of my father's new Jaguar.
Boy.
Uh-oh.
It was at this point, Father Simon, that my world stopped. Time slowed to a crawl as I considered the consequences of this action. My father was not known for his patience, and his punishment in those days could be severe. I looked across at David, who was aghast at what had just happened. However, it occurred to me that David might not have seen where his stone had gone. So I said the immortal words that will haunt me for the next 40 or 50 years. What have you done? Well, the effect on David was spectacular. Instead of questioning whether it was indeed his stone, he crumpled into a heap, sobbing and crying. What a softie. At this moment, the back door of the house exploded as two sets of parents careered out to see what the noise was. My father stood taking in the scene, the shattered windscreen, the broken garage window, and the blubbering wreck that was David. The conclusions were clear. I stood angelic-faced, looking with pity on my friend, and watched the drama unfold. My thought process, in my opinion, had been spot on, as David's parents' punishments were particularly feeble compared to my father's. David was, however, unceremoniously taken into the house and sent to his room. I was made to sit down quietly and lectured on not encouraging David to be reckless.
Yeah.
I said all the right things while remaining completely silent on whose fault it was. We went home shortly after the local garage had installed a new windscreen. I later found out What makes this slightly worse is that David's parents paid for the new windscreen, and David himself was made to lose his pocket money for several months to help pay for said windscreen. I could offer no real mitigation other than being 9, with a mind as sharp as a razor in a moment, entirely motivated by self-preservation. I cannot ask for forgiveness from my parents or David's parents, as they are conveniently no longer with us.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think that came out slightly harshly, Jim.
Yeah.
I do, however, ask forgiveness from my friend David, who is now a fairly high-powered accountant in the city, for carrying the burden of blame for an event that he was entirely innocent of. I throw myself at the mercy of the collective. I like the fact that David is a fairly high-powered accountant.
Yeah, fairly.
Not a high-powered accountant, but if he tried a little harder,
Yeah,
maybe he'll get there.
Good. Yeah.
Anyway, the perils of an inner tube-based catapult, laid manifest there by Jim and David. Sister Susie, what do you say?
Well, it just sounds all like danger to me, Jim. I feel like you shouldn't have had a penknife. You shouldn't have been playing about with an inner tube of a tyre. And
It's the 60s. We all did it back then.
I know it was the 60s, and I know that you're only 9, but I can't believe that he's never told David since then that it was his stone. And I just think for that reason alone, I just can't forgive him.
Okay, I thought that's what Susan said. I think I know what Matthew's going to say as well.
I'm going to forgive. Here's why. I strongly suspect that it maybe might have been David's stone that went there. I think David clearly thought that, because that's why he was very, very happy to take the blame. And you know, Jim, maybe it was your stone, maybe it wasn't. Who knows? None of us can tell. And it's all worked out fine in the end, because David's now a fairly high-powered accountant in the city, so he's fine. And everyone else is either no longer with us or is Jim.
Conveniently dead.
Conveniently dead. So for being conveniently dead, I choose to forgive.
For that reason?
Yes.
For the grief?
Yeah, for the grief, yeah.
Okay, which I think... Okay, so the people's verdict, please, for Jim. 61054. Just before the news, a rather fabulous confession from Jim, and it was the story of Jim, and we're back in the 60s, when you're playing outside with a penknife and an inner tube to make a catapult.
Yeah.
Jim and David, they had a catapult confession, and David took the blame for shattering Jim's dad's new Jaguar windscreen, but it was Jim's rock what did it. All these years, the guilty party has got away with it, until today. But it's okay, because David is a fairly successful accountant. People's verdict is in. What do they say?
Totally forgiven, says Adrian in Devon. He might not even have hit it that hard. Windscreens in the 60s were not laminated and would explode into a million squares if you were unlucky to get a stone flip up from the road. Johnny says not forgiving Jim at all. Can't believe he blamed his friend for breaking the Jaguar windscreen. Poor thing was sobbing and everything. And Anthony, travelling from Poole to Plymouth, says forgiven. The fact that David had to go without pocket money probably helped him learn to budget and hence become a fairly high-powered accountant in the city. So for that reason, forgiven.
Anthony, Johnny and Adrian, thank you very much indeed for those and all the other verdicts that came in. If you have a confession, we'd love to see it. And then if we use it, you get a smart speaker. Send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. I think we're in need of some sustenance, and let's see what young Susie has selected from the drinks trolley as it trundles past. What have we gone for today?
Well, it might be a bit early, but it is the 1st of October, so
Yes.
I've gone for a mulled spice cider.
Ooh.
Isn't that Christmas?
No.
No?
You can have it any time of year, but it's like autumnally, spicy,
Okay.
tasty.
Okay. Should I just have a small one? Because I'm...
Yeah, just a small one.
Okay. Thanks very much. That's what today's drinks trolley has to offer, and this is what today's confessional has to offer. This one comes from Steve, not my real name. Father Simon and the Holy Confessional Collective accept your high priestess, Sister Susie, as I know she will not forgive this episode.
Right, okay.
And Steve, not your real name, I think you're right.
Okay.
My tale goes back to 1989, when my youngest daughter had reached the tender, disruptive age of 9. Let's just call her Tina, to save identifying myself and receiving a retrospective visit from child welfare. Daily, and yes, I do mean daily, I had to cope with her jumping out of wardrobes as I opened a door, jumping out behind me when I walked in a room, jumping up behind the settee when I'm trying to watch the television, basically trying to scare me senseless many, many times a day. Well, I decided I had to do something to make her understand how making me jump at every opportunity was not the best idea. This is an important part of her education. I'm sure you will understand. I don't know why I didn't think of this before, really. But it was maybe because when I thought of it, I spent 5 minutes holding my stomach with tears rolling down my cheeks as I saw what I thought was going to be a very, very funny escapade. I had come up, I was convinced, with a very jolly wheeze.
Okay.
Anyhow, following another day of checking behind doors, in cupboards and inside wardrobes, lots of boo and all that, I put my plan into action. Before 9-year-old Tina went to bed, I managed to secrete myself under that bed.
Okay.
And I lay in wait. It seemed a long time whilst I was wedged in there. I was all hot and itchy, but I knew it would be worth the wait. Eventually she came to bed, she got into bed, turned out the light. Now, for this to work as I wanted, I needed to wait a few minutes to ensure my plan landed correctly. She tossed and turned for a bit. Not yet. She rolled over a few times. Not yet. Eventually, she drifted off to sleep. Her breathing was regular and slow. She was definitely asleep. I gave it another minute. Then, at the appropriate moment, I moved myself into position with my hands and knees on the underside of the bed. And then, appropriate impressions here, Father Simon, then I made a loud, guttural wah! 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 noise. I pushed with all my might, with alternate hands and knee movements to create the relevant wave effect on the bed.
Oh, dear.
I have to say, the screams took me by surprise.
Really?
How do you expect a 9-year-old's going to... Although it is a wonder I could hear them through my satanic laughter. Tina jumped off the floating bed and legged it downstairs to my wife. She needed comfort and reassurance that her room wasn't possessed by the devil or one of his minions, if that is indeed what the devil has under his control. Now, here's the sentence with powered by understatement. Apparently, I misjudged the effect that this would have
Yeah,
on both my
yeah.
youngest and my now ex-wife.
Oh, right. Well,
And
boy.
the feedback I received made it very clear that this was not my proudest moment. Feedback?
Yeah.
Like you're at work.
Taking him for a
Yes.
review.
I seek forgiveness from my youngest only, as I still laugh like hell when I think back to that night in question. But I don't recommend this to anyone else, as it can have life-changing effects. And also your wife might leave.
Yes.
Love you for your fantastic show, Steve, not my real name. See email for details. Oh, okay, thanks. That's Nigel Johnson. Anyway, okay, I made that up. That's
Yeah,
fine.
obviously.
Yes.
I mean, this is a kind of a... I'm not sure. Even if you're fed up to the back teeth with a 9-year-old trying to scare you, well, I mean, I know Matt's going to be forgiving, and I know Susie. Well, go on, Susie, you go first.
No, Steve. I just think she was 9. That would have been terrifying, absolutely terrifying. Just even the idea of it.
I'd find it
I'd find
terrifying
that
now.
scaring now.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's just too scary, and it's just not very funny. And also, I don't like the fact that you found it so funny, and it's also that reason that you laughed at your own jokes and you thought you were hilarious, that I'm not going to forgive you.
Steve might be one of those people who finds everything that he does very funny.
Yes.
Brother Matthew.
Good for him. I'm going to forgive. Can we not all agree that maybe 9-year-old Tina brought this on herself? With all of her, she's going round, she's doling it out. Can't take it though, can you, Tina? So, so you should have seen that one coming. Maybe I would have probably let my wife in on the joke, and so she'd have known as
Yes.
well. And then it would have worked better. And
No.
then maybe she wouldn't have walked out on me. But
I suspect that might have been the last straw. as opposed to be the
I
whole
think it
reason.
probably was. And maybe everyone's happier in the end. I think probably Steve is happier, and so is his ex-wife. And so is Tina. So for that reason,
Yes.
I'm going to forgive.
Okay. All right. It's the people's verdict. Please, do you forgive Steve for his... Is it a prank? I don't know. I suppose it is, on his 9-year-old daughter and terrifying her in the middle of the night. 61054 on the text, please. First word is Simon for the people's verdict. moment, but just before the news, we had a confession from Steve, who basically confessed to terrorizing his 9-year-old daughter by hiding under a bed and pretending to be Satan. And
Yes.
I reckon if Steve's ex-wife was listening and recognized the players in this story, she'd be going, yep, that's why I walked out. Actually, that's basically what it boils down to. The people's verdict, here it comes.
So Richard says, not forgiven. She was 9 years old, the poor thing. It's one thing leaping out behind a door and shouting boo. A whole other thing, hiding under someone's bed, waiting 10 minutes and then making noises and movements in the middle of the night. Dreadful. Laura in Faygate says, completely forgiven. My dad was a huge practical joker, bursting into the living room one Sunday evening, having used green concrete dye to dye his skin, wearing a ripped shirt, think the Incredible Hulk. It was the late 70s. My sister and I eventually got over it, and now in our 50s, laugh about it frequently.
Right.
But finally, Simon and the gang, I've just listened to confessions and don't forgive, as my brother did exactly the same to me after I'd watched The Exorcist. He was only 11 at the time. Illegal.
Obviously.
But left me with nightmares for months. Linda, yes, that's my real
Linda
name.
Brown. Okay, all right, very good. Thanks very much indeed for all the verdicts coming in for that confession. And if you have a confession for us, you send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. Okay, let's just check out the drinks trolley. Find out what Susie's going to grab from there as we go past. What has caught your eye today, Suze?
Well, I've gone for a milk stout called Galactic, which is from Big Drop Brewing Company, which is also 0% and gluten-free. But it's like honeycomb, chocolatey. It's really lovely. And no alcohol
Matt's
as well.
rolling his eyes as though he can't
Of course he
imagine
would.
anything more unpleasant. Anyway, Big Drop are good, though, so that's a top recommendation. Thank you, Suze. Today's confession comes from Andy. Andy gets the smart speaker, Father Simon and the Benevolent Collective. I write with a sorry tale of reckless abandonment, for which I was responsible in the summer of 1986. My story does nothing whatsoever in the interests of Anglo-French relations. At the time, I was a 14-year-old secondary school pupil. I'd made the decision to try and seek some suitable employment, befitting of my, effectively, zero talent. No such jobs were forthcoming at this time, Father Simon, and so I had approached my mother in order to seek some help. The only avenue open to me in my career search, she said, was to search the back pages of the local Echo newspaper. My mother carefully scanned the situations vacant column before very quickly identifying an advert that appeared to suit me down to the ground. It read something like this: young person required to accompany a newly arrived French student around Folkestone and to undertake... I made up that. It's not really Folkestone, but let's just say it's Folkestone.
Yeah.
And to undertake out-of-school activities with them. Accompanying the message was a telephone number, and after persuading my mother to make the call on my behalf, it was established that the student was being accommodated by a host family less than half a mile away from where I lived at the time. The stars had aligned, Father Simon, and I was invited to visit the host family and to meet the student that very evening. As I trudged my way there, I was already spending my soon-to-be newfound wealth on the latest Duran Duran LP. On meeting the student, let's call him Jean-Pierre, it was quickly apparent to me that he spoke not a single word of English, whereas my advanced grasp of the French language at the time extended to bonjour and also baguette. So I was almost fluent. Anyhow, his host mother appeared to like me, although, to be fair, she most likely would have been fond of any kid walking through her door in order to entertain the hopeless Jean-Pierre, and promptly unclipped her purse, furnishing me with a crisp £10 note, in effect my very first wages. Excited at my newfound wealth, but less enamoured by the prospect of having to do something to have earned it, I asked her what she would like me to do with Jean-Pierre, who at this time had stood there looking slightly confused as to what was going on in front of him.
Yeah.
She shrugged and then said, I don't know, maybe take him up to the pedal boats. Well, after having made this suggestion, she then further unclipped her purse once more before removing and handing me another £10 note in order to finance the said boat trip. Well, it's fair to say I'd never seen so much money in my life. Shortly afterwards, we set off in the direction of the boating lake, which was about a mile away, and in the opposite direction to my home. No sooner had we walked a matter of a few hundred metres, though, I was struck with the most awesome and cunning brainwave. What if, I thought, I were to do a free activity with Jean-Pierre? That way I could double my money. The prospect of this was mouth-watering, and I felt sure I would definitely have enough residual money to buy a new set of clobber from the local Foster's menswear shop as well.
Foster's, yeah.
Nice.
Promptly, and with direct directional hand gestures to Jean-Pierre, we turned about and headed back towards my home. I, at the time, quite liked tennis, and I was aware that my secondary school had a tennis court, and although it was out of hours, I was aware of a handy hole in the fence, allowing access to them via a neighbouring allotment. My plan had negated any necessary court fees that might be incurred at one of the proper pay tennis courts. Still confused, the hapless Jean-Pierre had followed my quickened pace, taken several detours en route, cutting through lanes and side streets to my house, where I retrieved 2 tennis rackets and a ball before heading off on another convoluted route towards my school. I dashed across the allotment, Jean-Pierre in tow, through the previously mentioned hole in the fence and onto our centre court that we had at school. Less than a few minutes into our game, I became aware of a distant voice shouting, "Oi!" As I turned to look over my shoulder, I quickly became aware of a figure running through the school grounds towards us, and whom I quickly recognised as Mr. Biggins, the school caretaker.
Of course.
Although he was much loved by everyone at the school, he did have a reputation of running the place with an iron fist. So instinctively, I dropped my tennis racket and bolted towards the hole in the fence. As I glanced over my shoulder, I noticed Jean-Pierre standing on the tennis court, still in a service receive pose. Very confused as to what was happening. My last shot of him was Mr. Biggins rapidly closing on his stationary figure. Jean-Pierre had made no attempt to secure his freedom, nor to follow me. I never saw Jean-Pierre again. Nor my 2 tennis rackets. I left the scene of the crime fully aware that given the convoluted route we had taken from his host family's house, part the way to the boating lake, back to my house, then onwards to the school, he wouldn't have a clue, not the faintest idea where he was or how to get back. I'd left him at the mercy of the school caretaker in the middle of an act of trespass without one single word of English in his vocabulary, whilst I counted out my very well-earned £20.
Oh, yeah.
In Jean-Pierre's honour, I probably did kit myself out with some fine clothes that week, which I would have worn while spinning some quality new tunes by Duran Duran on my record player in my bedroom. I obviously have to seek forgiveness from you and the French government for my selfish abandonment of one of their citizens, who was, of course, under my care at the time. I mean, this is not the kind of example that we need to set to our French brethren, Sister Susie.
No, it just really isn't. I was Andy. I just can't believe that you just left him alone. You could have, in your haste to get out that hole in the fence, you could have just, just done a little, like, come with me, follow me, come on, we're off. And he would have followed you and been behind you, and you wouldn't have left him there. I can't even imagine how he even got home. That poor French boy, Jean-Pierre. Can't forgive you, I'm afraid, Andy.
T'other brother.
There's a lot weird going on here. I mean, number one, who advertises in the paper about, can you take one of our house visitors out for the day, please? What? And you're going to pay him 20 quid? That's amazing.
It's in the local paper. It's fine.
And also, Jean-Pierre was going to be fine. Mr. Biggins didn't have any jurisdiction over Jean-Pierre, so he could just stay there in the tennis court. And isn't this like one of those role plays where when you're learning a new language and someone says, right, the role play is you have to explain to a caretaker that you've been abandoned by your friend who's been paid 20 quid to take you out for the day, and you've got to make your way home. And therefore Jean-Pierre would have learned English in one day. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
Okay, the people's verdict, please. Do you forgive Andy for abandoning Jean-Pierre? On the text, please, 61054, first word is Simon, for the people's verdict. Just before the 6 o'clock news, a confession from Andy. 14-year-old Andy took on Jean-Pierre, a paid job looking after a foreign student who'd come over.
That.
And he left him on a tennis court being chased by the caretaker.
Yeah.
With a shaky fist and all that kind of stuff. That was Mr.
Biggins.
Mr. Biggins, the caretaker, of course. Anyway, the people's verdict is in. Here it comes.
Sue in Middlesbrough says not forgiven. He was supposed to be looking after Jean-Pierre and he completely left him in the lurch. Jean-Pierre must have been so scared not knowing the language and everything. Tom in Woking, though, says forgiven. Ultimately, it was a character-building exercise for Jean-Pierre. I'm sure he was all fine in the end. And Doc says not forgiven. It has to be said, I was prepared to forgive right up until the point where he admitted buying some Duran Duran records. Anyone playing Duran Duran could never be forgiven. That said, I stumbled across you guys again this week and have to say that it feels like coming home.
Well, thanks, Doc, but where have you been?
And we played Duran Duran.
Yes. I mean, we've been here a number of years, but Doc, you're very welcome. Thanks very much for coming our way. Thank you for the verdict and your confession, please, to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. and the long, hot summer. All right. Time for something rather refreshing, I think, from our drinks trolley ahead of our kitchen's greatest hit at 6 o'clock. What are we taking today, Suze?
Well, I've gone with a spicy margarita. So chili powder, lime juice, blanco tequila, triple sec, and if you're feeling brave, Matt, a dash of hot sauce.
Oh, a dash of hot sauce. Why not?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have lime juice and soda.
Oh, yes. Not a bitter lemon.
A bit of lemon, which I still haven't had, to be perfectly honest. Today's confession comes from James in Bristol, not my real name and probably not the real place he comes from. And right, smart speaker, gone to you, James. Simon, the ever-forgiving Matt, and the slightly judgmental Sister Susie.
Okay.
This is a confession that has literally just happened.
Oh.
So I must change my name so as not to cause a night on the sofa. Usually it seems your confessions happened a few years ago or maybe decades ago, which is true. As time passes, we tend to feel more forgiving. Well, that does not apply to this one.
No.
I'm afraid. I'm not sure if that doesn't happen to this one, I'm afraid, or this doesn't happen to this one, I'm afraid. To picture the scene, it was a rainy September Saturday morning last week, and the little one had awoken exceedingly early. Myself and my fiancée heard the weekend wake-up alarm call that is our 3-year-old as he came into our room and jumped on the bed. Okay. Now, one point I think is important to understand is that on the weekend, me and my fiancée always agree the night before that one of the days, one of us will get up with the little one and let the other one sleep in. With the other day, it all swaps over.
Okay.
This is a fairly sensible and straightforward arrangement.
Nice.
One sleeps in, one is on duty. Well, it was my turn to sleep in. However, cometh the hour, and for whatever reason, I still found myself getting up with the 3-year-old. I, of course, was delighted to be on duty when it wasn't my turn. And really, I greatly appreciated the next episode of Bluey and Paw Patrol while my fiancée slept in. And then we watched more episodes. And then we watched even more episodes. One day, we will watch Jurassic Park, Planet of the Apes and Alien, but this day was not that day. No, this morning was full of Australian talking puppies and Canadian search and rescue talking dogs.
Excellent.
I then proceeded to get our son his breakfast, tend to his every need, clear up, wash up, sing songs, and also do all the voices for the aforementioned Aussie and Canadian animals. I'm pretty good with accents, Father Simon, much like yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I fed the cats and 6 kittens, and then I pulled open the blinds to start the day. And that is when calamity struck. The blind snapped in one place and fell off the wall.
Oh.
After some choice words to myself and fearful of the tongue lashing I'd get from the sleeping beauty upstairs, I came up with a cunning plan. I proceeded to fix the blind in such a way that it would still remain on the wall and look strong and affixed. But if anyone, namely my fiancé, should pull on it, then it would proceed to break once again.
Classic.
And it would be their fault.
Yeah.
It would be her fault. The trap was set, and I just had to play the waiting game. It's 7:30 p.m., getting dark as the sun had set, and I said, "Darling, should we put the main light on, maybe? Close the blinds? Yeah, dark already." She stepped up, took hold of the cord, and just as I had planned, gravity took over and the blind crashed to the floor, to my fiancé's horror. What have I done? We then got a new one the next day. These things are expensive, and my fiancée kept on apologizing for her clumsiness. However, I feel that I should seek forgiveness for the very fair, kind, and wonderful collective for what I got up to just last weekend. Interesting to have a confession from just the other day, because James is absolutely right. They are usually from a couple of decades ago,
So
because
true.
amount of time has to pass before it's okay to seek forgiveness. But the fiancé may well be listening to this and has just realised the fact that it wasn't her fault. It was James in Bristol, not his real name. It was his fault. Interesting that he listed all the things that he had done.
Yes.
Which I suspect his fiancée usually does. But anyway,
Yes.
what do you say, Sister Suze?
Yeah, this one, I'm torn with this one because I don't like the way he set his fiancée up, and I feel like, maybe he might have had to do 2 days in a row at the weekend, but she probably did it every day for the rest of the week, and probably does it more anyway. But I do also like that he has got up early and let his other half lie in, and maybe he didn't want to, but that was a lovely thing. So I feel like just because you've done that, maybe you deserve some forgiveness.
Oh, okay. So, forgiveness from the pub. What do you say, Brother Matthew?
Well, I'm definitely going to forgive because of lazy bones staying in bed when she'd agreed a contract the night before to she was going to get up, and she reneged on that deal and therefore deserved everything that was coming to her. Also, who puts the big light on? No one puts the big light on. We only put the little lamps on around the room. No one, but not unless you're performing surgery do you need to have the big light on.
What's the point?
No need.
Well, you've got a big light.
Because you put it on just, I don't know.
I don't think that's the main point.
Bring planes down. So for that reason, I'm going to forgive.
Right. Well,
because of the big light.
Because of the big
Zero
light.
reason for putting it on. Put on a lamp.
Why have it?
Anyway.
Surgery.
People's verdict, please. Do you forgive James in Bristol? 61054. First word is Simon. Just before the 6 o'clock news, today's confession, James in Bristol, something that happened just last week when he got up to look after the kid when it wasn't his turn. And then when he broke the blind, he fixed it so that it would then fall apart when his fiancée used it a little bit later on in the day. She took the blame. They bought a new one and she kept apologising. The people's verdict, here it comes.
Michelle in Byfleet says, I'm forgiving James. His fiancée should have got up and looked after the 3-year-old, as that's what she said she'd do. But not forgiven, says Kerry in Bournemouth. I feel like lying to your fiancée and setting her up isn't a very nice thing to do. They're supposed to be getting married at some point. That's not the right way to treat your future spouse. But Mike in Devon says forgiven. I agree with Matt.
Oh, yes.
Who puts the big light on? There's no need. They'll be putting the heating on next. Put on a jumper if you're cold.
That's got nothing to do with anything. But how funny that you selected that one.
Yeah.
Your confession, please. Send it to confessions@greatesthitsradio.co.uk. If we use it, you get a smart speaker. The new podcast appears tomorrow.